So the big news after we basically wrapped our show, might have been a day later, last week, this Saudi-backed golf league, LIV, and PGA are merging, is what the original top line headline was. And this was a massive shock to a lot of people because a lot of people in response are saying that the Saudis have bought golf. And I think that's a fair characterization, but I'm going to break down the timeline for you guys of how this all went down, and why this was so shocking and why Senator Richard Blumenthal in the Senate is opening up a Senate inquiry into this relationship. So let's just start at the beginning and work our way to the present. 2 years ago-ish, maybe a year and a half ago, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia, which is Mohammed bin Salman's like baby essentially, and has been used to sports wash and get Saudi money into different sports throughout the globe, to extend the Saudi government's reach with their vast resources into leagues where there's a lot of money involved, and to basically, paper over their well-documented record of violating human rights, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the repression of dissent, the treatment of women. We could go on, right? But they're trying to basically buy influence in this way and buy into things that people love, which are sports, to expand their empire. And look, that's kind of just capitalism to a certain degree. The United States has its own really horrific, psychopathic oligarchs. But for the PGA Tour, they saw this as a complete violation. So the Saudi government, through their wealth fund, PIF, the Public Investment Fund, started the LIV Golf Tour. They created it in this like kind of different format too, right? There were no cutoffs. Did they keep that? No cutoffs whatsoever for LIV?
Yeah, there were slight differentials.
I didn't watch.
There were slight differentials in the amount of holes played, cuts, and also differences in the broadcast.
And I mean, a lot of people didn't watch. I mean, it was on the freaking CW, right? And
it was on the CW, and also the broadcasts were just because this is an inherently green and new league that is not, staffed or like occupied in terms of like positions of power for like something like a broadcast. I would say, like by experts or by people who have, cut their teeth doing PGA broadcasts, because those people probably still work for the PGA. They were not particularly telegenic relative to PGA broadcasts.
Yeah. And it was also just kind of slapped together as their way to encroach on this space. But because they have so much money, they were able to poach a ton of the top golfers. I think Phil Mickelson was one of the first dominoes to fall. It was also especially shocking because he had been incredibly critical of the Saudi Arabian government to that point, talking about Khashoggi, and then just did this clumsy about face. Bryson DeChambeau was another. Who else really off the top of my head were the top?
Brooks Koepka.
But Brooks Koepka came later. I remember, right? Months later.
Cam Smith, another big.
There we go. Yeah. And so LIV then hosted their first tournaments last year. The PGA Tour was really angry, banned the players who had defected or who had taken that money from participating in the PGA Tour. And Bradley, for the audience, the PGA Tour, it's not like it's one of the major tours in golf, right? And like, but I'm a little confused myself, because I'm more of a casual golf watcher, what the PGA Tour encompasses, like in terms of the tournaments that are beneath it. Or is it just this one major that we're talking about?
No. So basically, all the agreement, or at least what was out, what became clear, is that the golfers who were in LIV, or at least agreed to join LIV contractually, were still able to participate in the 4 Grand Slams events of professional golf, which are the U.S. Open, the British Open, the Tour Championship, and which is the PGA, and the players. And those, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, are because those in some way, because they are a specific tournament that I think specifically like charter with courses and stuff. That is not like a PGA only event. Like all golfers in one way or the other are eligible to make the cut for that tournament.
Okay.
Like what? But if, for example, something like Indian Wells or the Waste Management Open or something like that, or like that type of stuff, like events outside of events outside of those 4 Grand Slams that are open to all comers, basically.
Yeah.
LIV golfers could not compete in those.
Right.
So you could be watching a regular standard PGA non-Grand Slam tournament, and you would know at the point before the merger that you wouldn't be seeing Phil Mickelson compete to make the cut. You wouldn't see Brooks Koepka competing to make the cut because they were actually barred from participating. And that was part of the legal fight that the LIV and PGA were engaged in. And that
Right.
LIV was alleging that there was some overtly discriminatory behavior by the PGA of disallowing LIV golfers to play in PGA events.
But that's the But that's why Mickelson and Koepka were in the Masters, but not
Masters. Excuse me, players and Masters. That's what I meant.
Yes.
Of the four. Yeah.
Right. So, but still, the PGA Tour is a large chunk and like an incredibly important tournament, incredibly important chunk for these players. And so, then Brooks Koepka jumped ship a little bit later. That was a massive domino because he's probably the best golfer in the world right now.
He just won 2 majors very recently.
And then Mickelson and the other players start suing the PGA Tour because of their ban, and that snowballs. There's this countersuit litigation as well, and essentially what the basis of the suit ended up being was that the Saudi-backed PIF, the Public Investment Fund, started going after them on an antitrust level, essentially saying, you are exerting your power as a monopoly to chill the free market here. Mm-hmm. That's not a dumb argument. I mean, on its face, Bradley, would you say it's true?
What, that
the PGA is a monopoly in a way and using its force?
Absolutely.
So
as in the reason why for so long that there were no competitors to the PGA is because, simply put, there wasn't a backer for a separate league that had the endless open purse strings to combat what the PGA could offer their golfers.
And the PGA's purse strings were not as endless as they honestly portrayed, because the financial pressure from these lawsuits, when faced with an entity that has actually endless purse strings, they were not able to compete, and that's what ended up doing them and what forced them into this awkward marriage.
Which makes it interesting to me, at least, to consider that precedent with any other sport. Because,
yes.
Because, it's the same argument to be made. There's a reason why European leagues in basketball don't compete with the NBA. There's a reason there's really no competitor to the MLB whatsoever. There's a reason that the CFL or that the USFL or the XFL do not compete with the NFL. They have overwhelming market power and overwhelming influence and reach.
Yeah.
But the LIV was essentially able to, purely because of the money that they were able to put forward, could at the very least get the PGA to spar with them.
Yeah, and the part of the reason that the NFL and the NHL and the MLB can operate in this way is because they get exemptions for antitrust as sports leagues, and part of that legal requirement is that the players need to have a union, and that's not the case with the PGA Tour, and part of that too is because the PGA uses a non-profit tax-exempt 501c6 status. Now, you
Which I
might
believe the MLB also uses, right?
well,
Or
they had
had a tax
they
exemption.
all so the NFL relinquished it in 2015, which
Mm-hmm.
was the last of the major sports leagues, hilariously,
Oh,
because it's now the most
right,
profitable.
right.
They had filed as a federal nonprofit since the 40s. The NHL stopped filing as a not-for-profit after 2014.
Mm-hmm.
The NFL shortly followed, and the MLB has opted out. And this was a great piece that you put in the packet from that site, and I'm forgetting the name of it now.
Oh,
that
from
I'm stealing
Sportico?
Sportico,
Yeah, yeah.
that laid this out. The MLB has opted to not file as a tax exempt organization since 2008, and the NBA, as always, the best of the leagues in terms of how it comports itself, was never even like trying to milk all this money by pretending that it was a nonprofit entity, essentially. And so the PGA is still clinging to this 501c6 status, and it was coming under severe threat, both from the fact that their finances were being drained by the Saudi suit, and because the entire underpinning of this very flimsy classification was being undercut through this litigation. And so what the PGA Tour essentially decided to do was move some of its operations to a for-profit entity to still make a ton of money. And that for-profit entity is going to be backed with the money that backs the LIV Tour. So it's not a merger in the way that it was originally reported. However, LIV and the PGA Tour are now going to be connected to that sovereign Saudi wealth fund. So their status was in threat. And I saw ESPN reported like 10 years ago that the PGA Tour's nonprofit tax status has saved them around $200 million in federal taxes. So they're desperate to hang on to this.
Nice.
They are maintaining their smaller entity, but the more for-profit classifications are being married to the PIF, the massive purse connected to Mohammed bin Salman.
And
so essentially LIV and the PGA will have the same sugar daddy.
And the issue that comes here beyond the question of does the LIV moniker survive, or does essentially what happens is the PIF absorbs the PGA, and then the PGA just then functions as the PGA just with Saudi backing, because the Saudis ultimately got what they needed, which is the so-called adults in the room, right? People who can actually make this golf circuit run for them properly and professionally, and with access to all of the golfers and all of the events under the PGA umbrella. I think that it's basically as a result of that, the LIV will be gone in terms of the naming and things of that nature. It will literally just be the PGA asterisk, essentially. All that PGA needed was those purse strings to open.
Right.
They didn't need anything else.
Exactly.
And it puts them in a little bit of a bind, not in terms of the money, because the money's there, the money won't stop. Puts them in a little bit of a bind that PGA Commissioner Jay Monahan was out there being like, we stand with the families affected by 9/11.
Yeah.
The absolute horrors and atrocities committed by the Saudi Arabian government. We would never accept their money. I'm getting word that we need their money. And then with that being the rhetorical position that Monahan took, multiple other golfers did the same thing. Like Rory McIlroy was adamantly against LIV. A lot of other golfers with this very similar moralistic underpinning of why they were against it. But at the end of the day,
money talks.
Money talks, and the money's money. If the money's green and there's a lot of it, you'll turn back on that moralizing really quick when you realize that you basically have no other choice. So I think beyond the optics for those guys, it was pretty fucking stupid of them to pin it to something like that, to ultimately then turn their backs on it.
Of course. I mean, but they thought that they could huff and puff and talk about how much better they are than the Saudis, and then the Saudi money. But like in the end, the Saudi money blew their house down, really.
Absolutely.
But they're all going to get super rich in the end. It doesn't matter.
They don't care. Yeah, at that point, it doesn't really matter because
Except I do think that
it's a bad look, but
this congressional inquiry by Blumenthal and then
right.
who in the House?
This, as well as John Garamendi, a Democrat from California.
Although with the Republicans controlling the House, who knows if that like probe or if they get a hearing in the House? But at least they can get one in the Senate if Blumenthal tries to pursue this more.
Right.
But that could really threaten. I don't know if it threatens any kind of potential like financial relationship between PIF and PGA, but I do think it threatens their 501c6 status, because then by that point you guys are really going to pretend after you made a huge stink that you still have some sort of non-profit entity associated with the PGA Tour. Give me a freaking break, bro. That's not going to happen. So perhaps with some increased scrutiny, then PGA like just caves and does like the other, four leagues, the major four leagues that we mentioned in this country, and abandons their like commitment to that hilarious tax exempt status. But like now that gives, with these major purse strings, that still gives them the ability to make hand over fist, even without classifying themselves in that way for the IRS. So fascinating. Pretty disgusting, I would say, to see Mickelson and others gloating on Twitter, like, because they were, wagging their fingers at Jon Rahm and even Tiger Woods for moralizing, and Rory McIlroy, and staying with the PGA Tour. What are you guys gloating about? It's just like you sold your souls, and now other people are being forced into participating and taking money from these guys. Because, I mean, let's be real then, just to return to the point about the monopoly and the antitrust stuff, this proves their point, right, Bradley? Like, this proves the fact that the rest of the golfers are going to have to just like go with this, proves that they have nowhere else to go as a workforce. It proves the point that they are a monopoly.
And I want to be clear. Some people are in the YouTube chat are making this point, which I think is a good one. Is that I of course 1000% lay more of the blame in terms of like the capitulating, and because, well, first of all, the capitulating probably had to happen at one point or another, because Jay Monahan said transparently that they could not withstand the legal fees required to continue to fight the LIV. However, the moralizing and the equivocating started with Jay Monahan and the PGA and bled down to the players who thought that they were in lockstep with the organization in morally and financially and organizationally protesting this other league.
Yeah.
And what I mean with where the players come into it is it's less that I'm fully faulting them over the PGA. It's just that by doing so, by hitching their wagons so closely to PGA leadership, for PGA leadership to then turn around and make this merger. Unfortunately, the byproduct of that is it does make them look stupid and make their positions look relatively hollow, because unless I'm proved extremely wrong, I do not think that a golfer like Rory McIlroy is going to boycott this merger and not play to uphold and defend the rights and the feelings and the experiences of a bereaved surviving 9/11 families. I don't think he's going to do that.
Nor should he.
Of course, I'm not saying he should.
He has the right to participate and play golf at a professional level.
I'm not saying that he should or has to. I more mean that there's one pipeline now.
Yes.
And they're not going to forsake that. So I think it's fair for people to see those public comments from everyone involved and be like, well, maybe they either shouldn't have said those things if it was going to lead to this inevitably, or two, did they really mean it at all?
Yeah.
I think those are fair questions.
I think so too. But that is a massive story, and I hope we were able to clear that up for some people about what the hell just went on last week.